sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that celebrates sex and certainly isn't interested in erasing it. I'm La Bianca, and with me today is the most magical cross between Harry and Hagrid, Christy Powell.
Howdy.
And joining us tonight is Katy Montgomerie, an LGBTQ rights activist who has been holding court on Medium on behalf of trans folks during the last 6 or so weeks. It's been a little bit rough. By far, this is the worst installment of the Harry Potter series. J.K. Rowling and the UK TERFs. Katy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So if J.K. reviewing herself to be the inspiration or maybe even the incarnation of Dolores Umbridge disappointed you, please give us a call to commiserate. We're here at 512-991-9242. You can also reach us at you can call the show online at tiny.cc/callsex, tinycc/callsex. And I guess I just want to warn everybody, y'all, this is going to be kind of a bumpy one. And I know there's a lot of trans folks in particular that have been following this story. Katy, you've been following this story. I know V and I have talked about it. This has been going on for a while now. So to anybody who's watching this who feels like maybe this is a good week to skip Secular Sexuality and maybe take a bath or watch some trashy TV, you have our blessing. We appreciate you being here, but if you're tired of talking about this shit, know that you're not alone.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, we would be remiss if we did not cover this, especially when we had the opportunity to have somebody like Katy on the show, because this is what we talk about, right? This is our focus. But yes, as Christy said, if this is just too much JK for you, that's fine. Bordering on too much JK for me too at this point. So.
Oh yeah, way too much for me. I'm into integer wraparound. I'm back to the start.
The bell curve has gone all the way down and up the other side at this point.
Yeah.
All right. So Katy, we're going to jump into exactly what's been going on and kind of getting an overview of the whole situation. But first, I want to make sure that we give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are and why this is an interesting topic for you.
Hi, I'm Katy Montgomerie. I am basically a dickhead who argues on the internet with people who are wrong about things. I argue about feminism, like particularly is my main focus, and particularly LGBT rights. I myself am a trans woman, so anything trans rights is like quite important to me. I feel like, especially at the moment, there's in lots of countries, particularly the UK where I'm from and the USA, trans rights are a political issue that's happening, and there's a lot going on, and laws are changing, and it's important to counter misinformation, basically. And that's what I spend too much time doing because I'm addicted to Twitter. So
you and me both. It's an amazing platform. It also tends to attract a certain type of troll.
Yeah, like me.
Oh my gosh.
It's definitely the worst and the best.
Yes, exactly. You get everything in bite-sized pieces. It just punches you. So, all right, let's jump in to give us a little bit of a rundown about what's been going on with J.K. Rowling. Where did this all start, and when did you start to get worried about it?
Yeah, so I remember in like 2018 or something, she liked a tweet, which was, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was some transphobic nonsense from some transphobe person. And as soon as she liked that, like someone noticed, people notice what celebrities like for some reason. Mm-hmm. And the story was, I clicked like by accident or whatever it was. But that caused people to then look at her follow list and notice that, like, obviously people, you can follow whoever you want. And like, I follow loads of people. I follow, some transphobic people and some men's rights activists and like the whole spectrum because it's good to. But when someone follows all of the big players from one side of the political spectrum and none from the other, it's usually a sign where they're learning, at least.
What information they're absorbing, what they're putting into that bubble.
So she was following most of the big UK players in gender critical, which is the movement, which is basically the anti-trans rights movement in the UK. And combined with that tweet, it was just a bit too suspicious, you know. And also you could, if you accidentally clicked a tweet like that, you could be like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, you know, like I support trans people and I support trans rights, and it was totally
right.
Instead, it was just like it was an accident, like
crickets.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like most of my friends were just like, well, she's obviously just, you know, transphobic from that moment. But yeah, then it kicked off with when there was a trial here. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect segue. I know that I became aware of this whole situation. And I remember hearing about that liked tweet in the list of followers after the kind of hashtag I stand with Maya situation came about, and people were like, well, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. But that's kind of where it entered my awareness. And I know I started seeing a lot of people that I was following start talking about it after that. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that means, what that hashtag represents?
Yeah, this is quite a big deal, really, because obviously following people and liking tweets by accident every now and then isn't really a stance. Like, even if people are suspicious, no one really cares. But so she tweeted out this tweet saying she stands with someone who there had just been a court case. And that's like suddenly going from not really doing anything to making a huge political stand. So this court case was basically a lady worked for a think tank which deals with like equality and development around the world, and they chose to not renew her contract because of gender critical beliefs, which, you know, you could phrase as transphobic beliefs. And there was more to it, you know. This she is a sort of a campaigner for the gender critical movement and is very involved with it. I think so. J.K. Rowling and, you know, lots of people have tried to sort of spin it as, oh, she was fired from her job for saying one transphobic thing or something, and it's that's not the case. It's you know, she's very committed to her beliefs. So this went to court, and the case they actually did was, I think it was like a preliminary trial. I'm not an expert in law in either the UK or the US, so I can't really explain what this means. But the idea was basically to test whether it was a legitimate belief. So in order to see if, I guess it's similar to like religious freedom in that, are your beliefs protected as beliefs?
Right.
And the judge, so she went in with this belief that trans women are men and trans men are women, and everyone else is just basically your birth sex, and that was like the belief that she was trying to get protected in court. But here we have something called a gender recognition certificate, which means that legally you are as if you were born
right.
And she said that even in a case when someone has a gender recognition certificate, she would still refuse to refer to them as, or refuse to treat them as their legal sex. And so the judge ruled it was an absolutist view, and come out with this amazing line, which was, "This view is not worthy of respect in a democratic society," which I think is quite an intense thing to be told from a judge.
Wow. Yeah.
I guess that's some legal term. But anyway, so that was the fallout. And the gender critical side are trying to spin this as like you can get fired for saying someone is what you think they are rather than what they're saying they are.
Right.
But there's a line between accidentally misgendering someone once and like serially harassing a trans person because they're trans. And there's also a line between
being fired and just someone deciding not to renew a contract, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance in this, and it's worth reading the court ruling if you feel that I'm spinning it a certain way, because I don't think it's very ambiguous. Yeah,
Well, and that's something that you brought out in your articles that I really hadn't noticed, that there is so much like active spin from JK, because I think I had it in my mind that this was a case of some rich person with a big microphone holding a really phobic or bigoted belief and then just not doing anything to like stop that. It wasn't until I read the narrative as you kind of lay it out, Katie, to recognize that she's very intentionally and actively a transphobic force.
I think that, I mean, I couldn't necessarily credit her with the decision to spin because, you know, sometimes people, when you're part of like a political movement or a group, sometimes these spins develop and you that's what you learn and you're, so one thing that I would say as a criticism of the gender critical movement is that it's part of it almost is to ignore criticism. Like it's very, very ingrained. Like so often, like with my article that I wrote, I posted it around quite a lot of places, and I always try and say, like, I'm trying to come at this like a sort of a skeptical position. I'm saying I've provided a counter argument to everything she said, all sourced. Read it. If you find something wrong or logically inconsistent, I will change my article. And you know, one person has bothered to try, but most people, you know, would just say, "No, I know Katy Montgomerie. Like, don't trust them," or like, "No, this is bullshit," or whatever. And I think it's so ingrained into the general gender critical movement to just particularly dismiss what trans people say. So I think that, you know, I couldn't say that like J.K. Rowling's come up with this idea. It's just so typical. I feel like when she wrote her like essay, I could have written that because I've spent so long talking to gender critical people. I mean, it was just, it was like, you know, it's almost like reciting the holy text or something.
Yeah, it's always disturbing when you see somebody start repeating language so exactly. When a group of people starts saying the same thing in the same way over and over again, that's kind of your red flag to be like, there's something happening here that is not critical, that's not rational, that's not actually looking at the evidence and coming to conclusion yourself. This is groupthink. And yeah, it's always disturbing to see that, especially from somebody who you may have really, you know, venerated or appreciated in the past.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's certain few phrases that they're like dog whistle phrases. I mean, I guess it's like, you know, with a lot of politics nowadays, someone will say something and on its own, you couldn't, like, it would be, you kind of look mad if someone like if you know nothing about it and someone just says all lives matter, and then you're like, you're racist. Like, if you didn't know about that, that might seem like an extreme reaction, and I guess that's the whole point in it, is to say things to flag to other people what your position is without saying it. And I think that, like, my biggest frustration that I have when I'm arguing with gender critical people is I'm like, just say your position. Like, if you want to ban all trans women from the toilets, just say it, because then I can argue against it and we can have an argument about it. If you're going to say, I want to defend sex-based rights and or whatever, then like, I know what you're trying to say. I know what you're dog whistling because I've talked to 5,000 people before. But just, it's so frustrating. I always feel like I'm never having to dog whistle. I'm never having to I say exactly what my political position just up front. Yeah. So it's very frustrating, and to see that there's quite a lot of that in I think in J.K. Rowling's essay.
Yeah, talking a little bit more about where she's going from that initial standpoint of liking a tweet that was not good, following some people who were really big red flags, and then, you know, tweeting out the hashtag I stand with Maya. All of that can kind of sort of be explained away by people who want to explain it away, right? Oh, well, maybe she didn't know that this was actually what was going on, or maybe she just saw a hashtag was trending and wanted to trend too. And like, it's not good. Like, none of that is like a good thing to do. Like, research the hashtags and the stuff you're getting behind before you get behind it. But recently it's become just blatant. Like it's really hard to argue anymore that this is not just full on attack mode. So let's talk a little bit about the more recent tweets that have been coming out from her, and then the couple of essays that she's been just putting out there trying to defend her position. What do you think spurred this shift from kind of defensive to offensive?
Yeah, so maybe something that we'll come back to later. I think that one of the key things in the UK, which is spurring a lot of the gender critical movement and which is kind of like fueled the fire, is we've got this thing called the Gender Recognition Act. And we've been discussing reforming it for about 3 years now. And that lets you get the thing I mentioned earlier, which is a gender recognition certificate. So anyway, basically, if you're a trans person and you want to change your legal sex, you can change your passport, you can change your driving license, you can change your bank details, you can change everything. But there's a few like stupid loopholes and stuff in the law. For example, if you want to get married, if you want to get married, say if you're a trans woman and you want to get married as a wife, then you need to have one of these gender recognition certificates. Otherwise, legally, they have to call you a husband at the wedding, which is just, even if your passport says female on it, which is some nonsense of UK law. But at the moment, so if you want to change your passport, you can, the process is fairly straightforward. But to get one of these gender recognition certificates, you need to get a medical diagnosis. You need to have lived as your new sex for 2 years. There's a few other things. You also have to send off details of all of your medical procedures to some panel. It's all kind of nonsense. And basically, we're just saying, can you make it easier? Some people are having to wait 5+ years to get one of these. And
right.
Like I'm only just at the point where I can apply for one. And like I've looked like this and been living my life for years. And if I wanted to get married to someone and I had to wait, like, it's just pointless. It's not a major law, but it's a good catalyst for the media to spin up fears about trans people. And so anyway, this reform is coming up now, particularly in Scotland, and the rest of the UK are doing it differently. And J.K. Rowling Scottish, lives in Scotland, and the Scottish one is a bit further ahead.
Got it. Okay.
I think that is like a lot of, it's something that they've been building up to. So I think that's part of the drive for it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we're seeing very similar things on this side of the pond, which is mostly a lot of the Supreme Court cases. The Supreme Court has been in session now for a month or two, and they've been handing down a lot of verdicts about a variety of topics. And one is sexual orientation and gender expression, essentially the entire acronym, right? Protected under the 14th Amendment, which says you cannot discriminate based on sex. And what does sex mean? And does that include, transgender people and, gay people and bisexual people and just anybody who has some kind of tie to that word? And so we are also seeing a big discussion kind of reignited out here. And so, thankfully they did change Title 4. The 14th Amendment to actually incorporate the LGBTQ plus community, which is amazing. But it is sparking a lot of the same conversations that I think that you guys must be having as well. Yeah.
I think one of the differences, I don't know if this is jumping ahead a bit, one of the differences is that the UK government's really been dragging this out and the media has really been dragging it through the mud. And I think that, I don't know, I knew about this Supreme Court decision in America. I talked to Americans and they weren't even aware of it. Whereas I think every British person in the entire country at least has some idea that there's something going on in trans rights at the moment. So.
Interesting. I would love to just have like a conversation about the difference between media coverage and politics in these two countries. Just go for that, but that's not what people are here for today. So let's talk a little bit about why do you think that J.K. Rowling is saying these things? Like, what's in it for her? What do you see as her motivation? Certainly not to excuse it in any way, but to understand where the opposition is coming from. Is this something that stems from a personal aspect? Is this more of a everyone else is being an activist, I need to find something, I picked this really awful thing and now I'm all in,
On the
like,
wheel of activism.
right?
Transphobic.
Right. Yeah, why J.K. Rowling? Why?
So I haven't talked to J.K. Rowling, so I couldn't possibly say what her motivations or thoughts are other than what she's written. But I think I've talked to lots, thousands of gender critical people and lots of ex-gender critical people as well. And I think that for a lot of people, at least starting off, it can be built on sort of some negative experience they've had in the past with, sexual assault or something horrible like that. Quite a lot of the ex-gender critical people I've talked to said that what got them into it was, they had some experience of that. This is more common for the women.
Mm-hmm.
They've had some horrible experience with men in the past, and they just recognize the need for sometimes some kind of space away from men. And then it's very easy to be if you don't know anything about trans people, it's very easy to be sold this idea of men in dresses coming to shoulder their way into your space. And I think if you've never met a trans person, or if you have met a trans person, you've had a bad experience, which can happen, it makes you think about this. And then this whole kind of almost cult-like movement is ready to feed you with all of these horror stories. I feel like I know the name, first and second name, of every single trans criminal in the world right now, because there's only so many, and they all know all of them, and they've all listed. I've seen all their photos, and they always ask me to explain them and apologize for them. And I think it can be very easy to see this as like it's quite triggering. This idea of these perverts come into your spaces, and the law just protecting them over protecting you. It's quite easy to sell this idea to people, and I think that radicalizes a lot of people. And I think a lot of other people are homophobic or very traditional family values, and this is an outlet for that, and suddenly it's almost like acceptable, because it was acceptable to be homophobic 30 years ago, and now, in England, it's unacceptable to be homophobic. People still are, and you still get celebrities saying bullshit things, but generally it's an unacceptable position, whereas it's kind of acceptable to be transphobic. You're just asking questions, and now you can divert all of your anti-LGBT angst into that instead. And
exactly.
You can see that straight away. They'll be railing on trans people, and then they'll say something about drag queens, and then they'll say something about gay men adopting, and all of a sudden they'll be saying the F word, and whoa, okay. I don't think you're gender critical at all, or well, that's what gender critical covers, but you're claiming to be a feminist and you're actually just a traditional novel. So
no, that's no worries here. It is true. It's more acceptable to be transphobic than it is to be homophobic. Even most places here, probably there are still states and areas that you can probably get away with being very homophobic, but at least in the more metropolitan areas, that's not something that's acceptable. And so anybody who still has that issue, of course, they're going to go and find a new way to express that in a way that is more, socially acceptable, for lack of a better term. And okay, that makes a lot of sense. I know do we have any calls, Christy? Because I do want to jump real quick into one more question, just kind of about the context, and then we'll jump into a call or two.
All right, great. I'll keep the lines warm.
Sounds good. So I did just want to bring up this letter that we're hearing about now at the beginning of this month in Harper's Bazaar, I believe it is. It's a letter warning about the quote-unquote restriction of debate alongside, and J.K. Rowling has signed it alongside some other notable people such as Noam Chomsky, Margaret Atwood, and Steven Pinker, among others. And I read the letter, and I can see where J.K. Rowling is going and signing this, right? And saying, "Oh, yes, I feel like this is speaking to me, and I can sign off on this because I'm currently being criticized for these harmful views that I'm espousing." But I'm curious what your thoughts are about the letter in general, if you've read it, and kind of what where this came from. Is this something that she kind of spearheaded? Is this something that she just kind of found and was like, yes, I have a personal anecdote to relate to this letter, so I'm going to sign on? Is the letter inherently transphobic? Like, how would you describe this to somebody who's coming across it for the first time?
So I haven't read the letter, so I'm kind of commenting blind, but I know that it's kind of this thing that people have with cancel culture and just the difference between like shutting down someone from having their opinion and criticizing for someone for having a bad opinion. I think that traditionally, like celebrities who everyone hears from, you couldn't voice your opinion to them. If they say something rubbish, they'll be in the newspapers and then that's it. And they can just choose to not read the newspaper. Whereas now with social media, like you can say, I hate trans people. And if you've got 14 million followers, then you're going to get 7 million people reply to you saying, I hate you. And that's incredible. That must be overwhelming for anyone. And I think that, especially when you have any view, obviously, you don't want it to be shut down, and getting loads of abuse from people is pressure to shut down someone's view. I mean, that is getting loads of abuse shuts down your view. But I think one of the things that lots of the sort of proponents of this kind of thing are missing, like they often come in this free speech angle. They often say, this is nonsense, they're being cancelled and it's shutting down freedom of speech. But I mean, it is freedom of speech. What are you proposing? That someone with 14 million followers can say something bullshit and no one's allowed to reply, or no one's allowed to criticize them, or even no one's allowed to have their own opinion back? I think that when you've got a huge platform, and especially when you're famous and rich, you have the media pretty much will republish anything you say. It's part of having a political opinion, if you're famous, that people are going to retaliate whatever you say. So I think one of the ways this gets weaponized, particularly against trans people, I mean, I'm sure it does against lots of activist groups, but particularly against trans people, is there's this kind of idea that the gender critical side is trying to spin, that trans people are scared of debate, or they don't want to debate, or they can't support their views, or that they just want to shut people down, and that's their only way that they can get their position across. And this comes partly from the fact that trans people don't have these people with huge platforms, and they don't have the traditional media supporting them, and they're quite marginalized. So there's always this kind of power imbalance,
right?
Where if you when you're a cis person and a billionaire and a celebrity, you can say something, it just doesn't affect you. Like, you're completely unaffected. Whereas it, to the lots of trans people, it like can turn their world upside down, and they have no voice or anything. And so, like, saying no debate, like, why should you be able to debate some trans person's life who you're saying that we should take their rights? It's just nonsense. So people say, oh, well, we shouldn't be debating this, but then that sounds a bit like you're not allowed to say your opinion. And
right.
They sell it like that because they want to get all the free speech people on board. Trans people don't like freedom of speech, which is obviously just nonsense, because trans people have not had freedom of speech for like thousands of years, and this is the first time ever in the history of humanity trans people have been able to even talk about being trans.
Right, talk about freedom of expression, but not that way. That's not okay.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I don't know if that addresses your question. That was a bit of a ramble.
No, that makes sense. I think that focusing on the cancel culture element, which is something that we've talked about, I believe, on this show before, I've talked about before on other streams, that is like a larger conversation, and I'm pretty sure it's a pretty good catch-all for any person saying anything remotely, out there, to be like, oh yes, I agree with this because my statement is currently coming under fire and it's uncomfortable. It is kind of a leveling of the playing field. It's a loss of that privilege, as you were saying, to be able to say anything you want to say and not be held accountable. Social capital on the internet is pretty much the same across the board, right? You can have more of it, but that also means that you are more likely to encounter people who disagree with you and who then decide to take their social capital elsewhere. So yeah, I think that it's an uncomfortable situation.
Of ideas.
Right, exactly.
I think for trans people also it's, or for like people taking a transphobic position, it's quite shocking because especially when you're a bit older, you've been able to say anything about trans people, literally unrestricted, for your entire life. Like they can have, mainstream films where the punchline of the whole thing is, oh, it's a man in a dress, or like trans people can be on, like we have had a really good comedy in the 90s or early 2000s where one of the episodes, the entire episode was just themed around haha, she's a man, and the last half of it is just this man beating her up to a laugh track. And I watched that when I was like a teenager, and that was normal. So the idea that all of a sudden, when you go from that extreme where that's just like acceptable or even good, that's encouraged, and then suddenly it's like, well, you're not allowed to say that anymore. Not only are you not allowed to do the extreme stuff anymore, but the post has moved so far that to you it seems like shutting down your freedom of speech. All of the opinions you have on trans people are trash. So if you say any of them, people are going to call you out, and suddenly it sounds like, feels to you
like you can't say anything. Exactly. Learn new things to say.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that for trans people, there's a huge range. Even in some places in the UK, there are going to be places where the transphobic view from the 70s is still just normal. And there are other places where transphobia is totally unacceptable and they're like next to each other online. So
exactly. There are no boundaries like that on Twitter, fortunately and unfortunately. Christy, let's jump into some calls.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to start, if we may, with Charlie in Washington. Charlie, what do you got for us tonight?
Hi, guys.
Hey, Charlie. How are you doing?
One of the things I kind of wanted to talk about was, I think that the term TERF is very limiting because actually us trans males actually get it from the other side as well. Because like, for instance, I was recently looking at a post and it literally said, this was written by a gay man, and he's like, how to be able to recognize a trans female, haha, literally wrote haha after that, and not be tricked into having sex with a female. So I think the word TERF really limits what we're talking about. I think it'd be better if we all said trans exclusionary people, because I think that actually is more indicative of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I actually agree.
I guess kind of what I talk about.
Katie, you've written about the term gender critical and maybe some better alternatives.
So I've actually drawn a Venn diagram. I wish I'd had it prepared to show you of like the overlap, because I think that like TERF, for people who don't know, means trans exclusionary radical feminist, and it's something that came from the 70s, where radical feminism, some people took some ideas of radical feminism and used it to say, trans women aren't women, and all of the things that implies, and lots of radical feminists didn't say that, so they separated the two groups with this term TERF. And obviously there's traditional transphobia of like, yuck, a trans person, but then there's also this kind of like academic feminism, which says we're taking all of these feminist ideas, but we're just also adding in this premise that people can't change sex. And that, you know, if you start from that premise and run it through all of the radical feminist ideas, you end up with this huge, logically consistent worldview, which actually makes sense if you just start from this bad premise. But then the term TERF has kind of like taken on a life of its own, and now you see people online calling like Ben Shapiro or someone a TERF, and it's like, he's not a feminist, he's certainly not a radical feminist, he's not trans inclusionary, he's just a shithead. So I think that sometimes it is useful to talk about TERFs when you're actually talking about people with a radical feminist view. And like I personally, when I'm encountering them, I almost prefer encountering TERFs to any other kind of anti-trans position, because I'm a feminist and they have, you know, lots of feminist positions, which I just totally agree with, and lots of conclusions that I agree with if I accept their premises. Whereas most people opposing trans rights that I encounter have none of that. And we can't like really have a conversation because they don't have all these feminist understandings and viewpoints and things. So that's why I usually use the term gender critical, which is what in the UK, what they've labeled their movement. And that gender critical includes TERFs, and it certainly started in TERFism, and lots of the language they use sounds feminist, but the ideas and structure and stuff has kind of taken on a life of its own, and now it includes conservatives, it includes religious extremists, it even includes like men's rights activists and stuff, all in this big bubble. And then I guess there's a larger bubble of transphobe, which like there are some transphobic people who have no fuss about the gender critical movement, they just think, yeah, trans people. So yeah, you're right. And certainly like, I think, you know, like you're saying about a cis gay man, could be a TERF. I mean, could have radical feminist views, but probably is less likely to, but possibly. I have met some, but also might well just be, like you say, trans exclusionary, might just be a transphobe, might be a gender critical. It can be like kind of messy to have a term. But I try and be specific when I'm personally talking about them, so that you can know what kind of arguments they're going to be using. So yeah, sorry, I did a big ramble there. I agree.
No, not at all. I should point out that Charlie did drop off of the call, but I feel like that's a really valuable and beautiful answer, because these words have a meaning. And, you know, we can be specific or non-specific, but, you know, TERF is a valuable word if we understand what it actually applies to.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I think, yeah, it can be sort of, I don't know what the word is, not useful to call people TERFs who just, it doesn't make any sense.
Sure.
Right. Would you consider JK a TERF specifically? Does she exhibit the same kind of like radical feminist views, or would it be a misnomer to apply that label to her?
I think she would definitely call herself a feminist, and I think that she probably has feminist views, and I think that if we had a conversation at the pub, we'd agree on a lot of things. Whether she's specifically a radical feminist, possibly, couldn't be certain without
Fair.
hearing
That
other
makes
views.
sense.
The problem with gender critical is it's so single issue that when you, like, if you meet a TERF, like a real proper no true Scotsman TERF, they have all these other positions. They've got an opinion on sex work, they've got an opinion on surrogacy, they've got an opinion on, you know, all these other things. But gender critical people often only have one opinion, and it's about trans people.
Right.
So it depends. If J.K. Rowling has opinions on any other feminist position, then quite possibly yes.
That's a good way to determine that.
Well, I feel like, and I want to be careful in how I'm characterizing her arguments, but I feel like I have seen it presented that a lot of her transphobic beliefs, or a lot of the, you know, sort of softer, gentler things she's putting out there, have been tied to these ideas of concern for women. And I think that's part of what makes all of this so insidious, is because, well, I love women. Everybody of course we love women. And so there's a little bit of that philosophy that goes into it, which is why I think the word TERF is kind of useful to identify the specific type of transphobia that is particularly insidious.
For sure. And I think this protect the women thing is very appealing to lots of groups. It's very appealing to traditional family values conservatives. It's very appealing to, I guess, traditional homophobes as well. And it can also be appealing even to men's rights activists who, see the two groups a bit more separate, and, women should be protected and men should do or whatever.
Men should be men and women should be women. Harumph.
Yeah, that's why you see all of these.
There's the Hagrid coming out there.
Yeah. Cool. I'm going to use this opportunity of you making fun of me to turn back to the phones if we can.
Sounds good to me.
Cool. Yeah. A great segue opportunity. Let's talk to Elle in Arizona. Elle, what can we do for you tonight?
Oh, good afternoon, guys. How are you guys doing this afternoon?
Hey, not too bad. What's on your mind?
Hi.
I just wanted to add in regards to the definition of TERF. I think a better acronym for that would be something I refer as an ANTI, which is anti-non-binary trans individual. So I usually call these individuals antis. So that's my acronym I generally use in regards to it. So in reference to the letter, I actually read Katie's entire periodical on the discussion of J.K. Rowling, and I found it to be incredibly informative. But one of the things I wanted to emphasize is a lot of people don't know this, but I go by Ileani online on Twitter. You probably remember following me. But in reference to this, you guys have to understand that I used to be a borderline race realist. I used to be almost alt-right. And this is a bigger dilemma, larger than I don't think a lot of people understand. And what I'm talking about is if I take my intrinsic experiences I had in my past and correlate it to what I'm currently seeing and kind of going through and what I'm looking at in regards to specific narratives, this is a common talking point about basically LGBT individuals, like Katie mentioned, that dates back to the 1970s. See, for me, this is a common talking point you saw become predicated in 2017 with a person named Jordan Peterson, someone I'm pretty sure you guys are pretty well familiar with.
Unfortunately, yes.
Well, Jordan Peterson became famous because of C16 in Canada. And this is when this entire discussion, this disagreement about trans individuals in restrooms became more pervasive. And I would argue that most of this became more enlarged after gay marriage became legal here in the United States. And it just became a more broader, large emphasis in places like the UK, places in Europe, so on and so forth. But bottom line is this. I know this is going to be a large claim, but this is a mainstay of what I perpetuate in regards to my own talking points in my own channel, is this is a narrative that is encompassing to something that Jordan Peterson espoused for many, many years now, so it's called cultural Marxism. If you really look at an emphasis of this talking point, this has direct correlation to an emphasis of cultural Marxism that dates back to the 1960s about supposed degeneracy within society. And one of the main purveyors of this talking point was directly tied with a well-known anti-trans group known as the LGBT Alliance called the Heritage Foundation. Do you guys know who that is?
Yep.
Okay, so the Heritage Foundation is a highly conservative think tank here in the United States. But suffice it to say, there was an individual that co-founded that organization by the name of Paul Rayrich. Paul Rayrich was one of the most well-known, pervasive, common talking points of cultural Marxism. But to sum it all up, what I'm saying is, this is a specific narrative and worldview that has been around a very long time. And a lot of individuals need to understand that this narrative, this worldview, is why we're facing such oppression in regards to trans individuals like myself and others. And if I can just cap off at this, and I'm sorry if I talk so much, but for me, the biggest issue I'm seeing from my trans medicalists, people like J.K. Rowling, not only from in situations in the UK, but also from trans veterans. These are the same talking points and the problems trans veterans here in the U.S. have faced for decades. And this is coming from many, many individuals I've spoken to in person here in Arizona where I live, that this is what they've heard for decades. But I'm sorry, I've rambled on too long.
No, that's a beautiful way to kind of summarize a lot of what we've been talking about and give it that historical kind of context there. So I appreciate that, El.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention this because a lot of people don't understand that the narrative of cultural Marxism is, if you go back and you look at literature back in the 1960s and 70s, I've actually linked it in on my Twitter page on periodicals I've saved on a big file I have on my research. But there are articles, there are periodicals from homophobes back in the day, from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, people that were directly aligned with people like Paul Rayrich, that used the very similar talking points you currently see with the antis or the quote-unquote gender-critical individuals. One of the things that I find incredibly disgusting to me, that's the only way I can describe it, is how they claim to be supposedly for science, yet they'll promote individual ideas such as ROGD, an unscientific recognized mental condition anywhere by any major organization anywhere in the world. They'll promote an idea that biological sex is immutable to gender, which that is not the case. That's actually anti-science. And these are the main talking points of the gender critical movement, yet I don't see a lot of people, except individuals like Katy, clearly indicate this, which is a good thing, but I wish more individuals would notate these specific narratives by these individuals to clearly demonstrate that they are anti-science by every measure. But that's only my opinion.
That's something that I, like, as someone who considers themselves like quite skeptical and like interested in science and stuff, I find very frustrating that at least in the UK, the gender critical movement has managed to culturally put itself as like the pro-science position, and people like kind of buy into that. They're like, okay, yeah, I'll be nice to trans people and I'll let them do what they want, but I support science. And they kind of create this false dichotomy of like, do you support, like, yeah, you can support trans rights, but we can't start denying science. And I'm like,
right.
This, first of all, you're creating a false dichotomy because you can actually do both of those things. But secondly, one of the biggest issues with the gender critical position is it's like anti-science, like in several ways, like to its core. And yeah, they've definitely managed to put themselves forward like that. And it's interesting you said about race realism. I think that there's definitely some parallel to that.
No, Katy, you have no idea how much parallel there is with it when it comes to the previous rhetoric I once believed prior to 2016. I was a major content creator on YouTube until I retired, finding out that I was intersex and I had gender dysphoria in 2018. So a lot of correlation in regards to talking points like Stephen Molyneux and many others. I can of course, there are different topics or different notions. Of course, race is not the same as gender, but the same pandering, the same, this is the real science was a common talking point I myself used during that 3-year period. So when I hear individuals within the gender critical movement make similar connotations, this is precisely the methods and the tactics I once used when I was a reactionary at that time. So
100%.
This is go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is this right? It's like this, like, oh, we want to be nice, but this is like the science. This is the truth, and we can't just hold the truth back because we're being nice to people. And like, this is kind of it's the science the science itself is revealing that racism is true or whatever, and like, there's nothing we can do about it. And it's this kind of like, I want to have my opinion, but I also, which is bullshit, but I want to not be called out for having a bullshit opinion. So instead I say, this is not my opinion, it's what the science says. So then you just come up with some pseudoscience nonsense to back it up. And then that makes you look like you're, it's not my fault, I'm not transphobic, I'm presenting this scientific paper which says trans people are terrible.
Yes, I literally, I posted the link to this stream on Twitter. And I was like, hey, this is what we're going to be talking about. And somebody commented on Twitter, I'm just too much of a skeptic to buy into all of this. And I'm like, I was like, okay, you don't have to, but don't claim it's skepticism. It's a bad narrative that you've bought into. Don't pretend it's the same thing.
Like, be skeptical. Like, come and like hit me up on Twitter if you're skeptical of trans people. Like, if you're actually skeptical, then maybe you won't reach the same position I have, because you know, because you're wrong. No, because I'm not there yet or whatever. But I don't think it's possible to get to the mainstream gender critical position from skepticism. I think that you have to fundamentally.
Could I add something quick that was mentioned earlier?
Yeah, go for it.
Would you? You guys mentioned something about cancel culture. Now, this is another thing I've been doing a lot of research on. I'm going to be very blunt here, as I typically am. Cancel culture is a bullshit narrative, pardon my language. Every form of facet in regards to what cancel culture generally is McCarthyism. Anyone who espouses the definition or the terminology of cancel culture is literally speaking against something known as rights of association here in the United States. If you research what rights of association, which is a constitutional right equal to free speech, anyone who espouses cancel culture as a form of talking point, literally speaking against free speech and the U.S. Constitution. And to prove this point, I don't know if you know this, Katie and V and Christy, but just today it was announced that J.K. Rowling, the very individual who signed that supposed letter a month ago, just threatened to sue a periodical for publishing an opinion piece of supposedly claiming that she's a transphobe. So Miss J.K. Rowling, who believes in free speech, believes in discourse, threatened a libel suit against a publication for an opinion piece. This is how much these individuals generally believe in free speech. This is hypocrisy in display here. This is why cancel culture is not a real thing.
The level that gender critical goes to saying they're the ones pushing for free speech and then shutting down trans people's free speech is like, that's the tip of the iceberg. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but like, I know lots of people who have lost their jobs, particularly journalists, and particularly in the UK, for not directly for being trans, but for not wanting to go along with the like gender critical position. And they're very happy to just totally shut them down, you know, with legal threats. And like I myself have also received a legal threat for discussing trans issues from someone who's been pushing, oh, we just want free speech, we just want a discussion.
Right.
I think it's such a it's almost like part of it. Like you know, I don't think it can be. Lots of people, I think it's just rich people. You know, rich people often sue people and claim they want free speech at the same time. But it's, you know, they've got more rich people, so it happens more. It's very like, it's just so, yeah, tediously hypocritical. It's like.
Well, Medium, the periodical that you wrote that paper with, Katie, did a great piece about 2 or 3 years ago speaking on why cancel culture is not a true narrative. And I just want to cap it with this. If you really want to know what cancel culture genuinely is, except which is, there's a differentiation called call-out culture, where there are two distinct things. They have some correlation with one another, but they're not the same. McCarthyism, if you look at the people that experienced McCarthyism from the late 40s all the way to the 1960s, those people were completely, what's that?
I don't know what that is.
Well, that is a whole conversation that honestly I'd love to get into at some point. Elle, we're going to pop you back to our call screener. I'm fascinated by your story and would love to talk about maybe getting you on the show at some point as a guest. So if you would like to pop back onto hold, we'll get our call screener to get maybe some information if that's something you'd be interested in doing.
Sure, V, not a problem.
Awesome.
And Katie,
all right,
please keep up the great work. I just wanted to mention, Katie, keep up the great work and congratulations on your relationship again, V.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Thanks so much for calling in, Elle.
Yeah, you know, I want to mention just briefly, it doesn't feel like it needs to be said, but it also really needs to be said. There's plenty of science on this side of the aisle. There's all of the science on this side of the aisle. And we've got some links and things to that in the show notes. If you're curious, if you're skeptical, I mean, this is the ACA. We invite skepticism. I promise you, if you're right now feeling a little bit frustrated or concerned, do your research well and you will find that information. I've got links to different neuroscience journals, different psychiatric journals, all kinds of things worth checking out.
Yeah.
Can I just add one thing on this, like skepticism thing?
Yes, please.
Often, it's posed like two sides. It's posed like the gender critical side, and like they'll often say trans rights activists, but in case, a trans rights activist is a trans person who wants human rights. And so very quickly it becomes like most trans people. And if you're skeptical of a position, then you want to be taking on like the political position or the belief system or something, not like a person. I think that really, I mean, maybe this will sound one-sided and you can dismiss it, but I feel like gender critical is a political position, and really anyone who believes it should be able to argue it. I mean, really, you know, if you take a political position, then people should be able to be skeptical of it. But being trans itself isn't a political position. And if someone says, if they post a picture and you're like, debate trans rights with me, like, they might just be like, fuck off, I just want to go to the toilet. Like, I don't feel this is a political position. Whereas you can spin anything as a political position, but someone like me who is arguing the political side of trans rights, I'll argue it with you, but don't like assume that every or even any trans people should have to defend being trans as a thing.
Right, exactly.
So
and there's this
now,
weird like approach to it where if you get upset, you're suddenly no longer skeptical or no longer rational. So there's this sense that not only am I going to ask you to debate your existence with me, a stranger, but if you get upset about the intrusive and offensive questions that I'm going to ask under the guise of being a skeptic, suddenly you forfeit your right to claim skepticism yourself or to claim rationality, and you're just being hysterical, and clearly this is an emotional argument for you and there's no stock in it. So it's a lose-lose situation. If you don't engage, you're running away from it. If you engage too much, then suddenly you're no longer being rational. And it's just this infuriating it's a demand for performance that honestly I don't know about you, Katie, I'm sick of performing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of addicted to it, but yeah, I'm also sick of it. I think that lots of skeptical people aren't like being malicious about it or whatever. They literally just like, oh, a trans person has said something. I've got this view. I want to test it out. I want to ask some questions, like defend your position. Just if you want to do that, that's legit. But just find someone who is taking a political position rather than someone who is just trans. That there's a distinction,
right?
That's why I'd say, and that's why it often looks like the trans side doesn't want to debate, because the trans side is actually mainly just trans people.
That's a really good distinction. Yeah.
Whereas gender critical people all opt into it. You're not born gender critical. Anyway,
Right.
Next.
Well, I think it's a good reminder to all of us to, change the hearts and minds that you care to, but your existence doesn't obligate you to debate. Katie did a really beautiful job of separating out sort of like a political position versus simply existing.
Yeah. And I think that often, like, this is a kind of minority group thing in general. Being a minority group kind of is political because people often don't separate them. And you kind of find yourself having to justify why you should be the same as everyone else.
Yeah, like, right. And then you're suddenly a spokesperson for the whole group. And
then you say, fuck off, I don't want to debate. And it's like, there you go, trans people hate debating. They're all wrong. It's a religion. I don't believe in it. It's nonsense.
Oh, goodness.
Well,
How did
I don't
it
know
go?
that this works for everybody, but I don't know about the two of you. I just put all of these positions on a website, put that website on a business card, and if somebody wants to debate me at a party, they can pay my consultation fees. Like, here, go for it. Like, I will absolutely argue with you, but if you're good at something, don't do it for free.
There you go. I like it. Okay. Do we have a couple more calls to go through, or are we
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd love to touch base with Fred in Idaho.
perfect?
Fred, what can we do for you tonight?
Hey, yeah, thanks for taking my call. I really appreciate it. I feel like what I have to cover might go into the last call a little bit. You touched on cancel culture, and there's a lot of discussion about cancel culture as well as separating the artist from art and things that I'm all very new to, and I don't even know where I stand on any of those, and I don't think I could ever have a solid position on both those discussions. But when it comes to this specific one, it's more than just a personality who has a large voice, but it's a personality who also has produced a large amount of work that people have invested a lot into, such as the Harry Potter books or the Harry Potter movies. And really what it comes down to is my first focus is supporting the trans community and understanding that, Katie, you're not the voice piece for the entire trans community, and you three hosts are all separate entities. I'd like to get each of your individual opinions on ways that someone like myself could support the trans community when it comes to these bodies of work that have spawned from this controversial public figure.
I love that question. That is a great question. You actually predicted exactly where we're going to go in the interview next. But I would love to just run through that super quick, and then we'll dive more deeply into it after this call. For me personally, I'd say that if you feel comfortable, J.K. Rowling seems pretty touchy to trolling on Twitter, and if you just want to be a thorn in that side, that's always fun. That's a fun way for everybody to kind of have a laugh at this situation. More in terms of supporting her financially, which is kind of the big question here, which is, do I give this person money to continue to grow their platform if we know how she's going to use it? If we've seen how she's using her platform and we don't agree with it, the logical step would be to not facilitate the growth of that platform. So I don't necessarily facilitate burning your Harry Potter books or never watching the movies on
I strongly
Netflix.
oppose burning your Harry Potter books.
Yeah.
That's a very bad idea.
Yeah. But maybe get them from the library, or buy them from a used bookstore, or wait until the movies come out on a platform that you're not paying directly to J.K. Rowling. So there are ways to still consume this media, and a lot of the actors from the shows have come out publicly against her and actively supported the trans community, which is great. So there are ways to support them and to appreciate the books and the movies without actively paying J.K. Rowling money. So if you can find a way to do that, to me, that is the bare minimum. That is what someone who cares about the trans community should be doing, just because we've seen that she uses her platform to harm a group of people.
But also, I mean, if you buy, I don't know how much books cost. Like, if you buy a book and it's £5 or whatever, then it's not like you're signing someone's death warrant. Like, I know that you are kind of funding something, but like, the old "there's no ethical consumption under capitalism" thing. Like, perhaps if you maybe you're collecting all of her books and you've got one more to go, like, don't beat yourself up about it. Buy a book, and then maybe if it costs £5, donate £10 to a trans charity or something. Because
I like that.
There are so many other people. If you buy a book from J.K. Rowling, like, some of it goes to the bookstore, some of it goes to the people who work in the factory, some of it goes to, she's probably getting £2 of it or whatever. So it's not the end of the world. But yeah, if you're someone who's buying like every single thing and spending thousands of pounds on it, have a think.
Awesome. Well, great. Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I guess one only follow-up question. As far as the content of the stories themselves in relation to the Harry Potter universe, I still draw a lot of my own personal self-worth and just enjoyment from the series and the memories that I have in relation to me, my wife, my friends, when we read the books and watched the movies. And I just want to make sure that that's not doing any detriment to the trans community.
Right.
How do you all still feel about the stories continuing to this day?
Yeah, this is like this, like you said, the separating the art from the artist thing. I think that what I would say to anyone is, if you love Harry Potter, and you can still go on enjoying it, then great, just do it. If it's kind of now a bit marred for you, then maybe you can work on that and you can kind of separate them. But maybe you can't, and that's fine. Maybe it's slightly worse for you. Maybe it's totally died for you. It's disappointing when this happens. I think as a metalhead, I've had to try and separate the art from the artist basically my whole life. There's some very dubious metalheads, and sometimes it's just not possible. Like one of my favorite comedy shows, which I referenced earlier growing up, the writer of it and me have a history about trans rights now, and it has kind of killed it for me, which is disappointing. I'm very good at separating the art from the artist, but it's not always possible. Mm-hmm. But if someone still enjoys it, then I'm not going to hold it against them. I mean, if there's this weird kind of culty behavior where lots of the gender critical people who've probably never mentioned Harry Potter in their life, all of a sudden massive Harry Potter fans and buying all the merch. Like, if you're going out of your way to buy Harry Potter stuff specifically because she has an opinion on trans rights, then that's lame. And especially if you make it known to people, but it doesn't sound like that's even close to your thing. And legit, if Harry Potter or whatever's in the cinema, don't feel guilty, because that's rubbish. There's so, especially the films, but the books too, there are so many people involved in it, and all art does take a life of its own away from the artist. So just enjoy those parts. That's my opinion anyway.
Well, and I might just follow up with, I myself am not super deeply engrossed in the Harry Potter fandom. I have to admit that, I was never a Potterhead, and so I don't know all of the ins and outs. I recognize that some folks feel that there are some, pretty slanted references and some corollaries that might make people feel uncomfortable, or that once examined are perhaps bigoted. I don't know that that's grossly the case, but if that's your experience and it bothers you, that's fine to pull away from it. But if I hear your question, Fred, and maybe you're wondering, is there some secret hidden message I should be concerned about, or something like that, I think it's just always a good idea for all of us to be watching the media that we take in and getting a diversity of things. I appreciate that people love to be obsessed with Harry Potter, and I love that sort of geekdom and that desire to get really passionate about a subject. But just make sure you're balancing it out with some different types of media, some different types of artists, and a more diverse sense of opinion.
Perhaps check out some Bristol death metal bands. Sorry. Go on.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate all those answers. I'm going to watch this back and really try to do all I can to help out. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fred. Appreciate you calling in.
Y'all have a good night.
Absolutely. Take care.
I like that Fred basically predicted exactly where we were going to go with this last segment, which is, what do we do about this, right? What do we do? Because for a lot of us, and especially in this Western concept of capitalism and you speak with your money, and money is speech, and all of this, a lot of where we go first is, can I still buy this stuff, right? Can I still consume this stuff? And I think that's a valid question to be asking. And I find it fascinating that we kind of came down on different sides of that conversation. But it's just one aspect of what can we do. And I loved your suggestion of, if you're spending $5 $5, £5 on the book, donate twice that to a trans charity, to the Trevor Project or somewhere like that.
It's like a TERF offset credit.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Or
I
even,
like that a lot.
Even do some research or follow some trans people on your social network or whatever.
Yeah, or buy a book by a trans author as well. Like treat yourself to 2 books. Buy Harry Potter and then also something from like in the same genre that you like, but by somebody who is trans. So
I love that V's strategy always just involves buying one more book. That's the solution to most problems.
Do you want to hear something really horrific? The last book that I read was Return of the King in 2006.
What?
Well, I mean, after you finish Return of the King, there really isn't a better book to read after that. So I get it.
You're done. You're done. Yeah, Western literature.
You've read the books you needed to read.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So another thing that I mentioned on the call a little bit, and something I wanted to just get into because it's funny, is kind of the funny trends on Twitter that have been popping up, especially the one that kind of goes along the lines of, we don't know who the author of the Harry Potter books are. And I find it a funny way to implement the death of the author strategy that we were talking about, and separating the art from the artist in a way that will get under her skin, right? So there are some that are pretty popular. Harry Potter doesn't actually have an author. No one knows who wrote the books. Kind of crazy. Or I can't believe all this time has passed and we still don't know who wrote Harry Potter. Will we ever find out? And I heard we don't actually know who wrote Harry Potter. It's a mystery. It just appeared one day, authorless.
I heard it was Hatsune Miku.
Yeah, it's that's one way. It's a small way. It's not necessarily fighting back with your dollar, but it is getting out there and making your voice heard and showing support in a way that, if you're not comfortable getting into political debates or debates about gender or sexuality, and that's not what you want to invite into your timeline, this is a kind of very simple and innocuous way to show support, right? Of like, haha, make a joke about the fact that Harry Potter doesn't have an author. It's not going to change the nature of the dialogue itself, but it is going to signal to anybody who follows you that you stand with them, right? That you stand on their side. And that by itself can be so important to know that, oh, this person who I like, who I look up to, who I follow, knows what's going on and is coming down on my side.
For sure. I think that it can often be easy to overlook how much difference that makes. I think I didn't really understand it until getting more involved in this. But often I think you just assume that your position is taken for granted. It's very easy to assume everyone around you thinks the same as you until they open their mouth. And, if you are supportive of LGBT people, that's great. Like, you don't have to do anything. Like, just not being a knob is a good way of being supportive. But sometimes just saying, by the way, I support LGBT people, like publicly as a public stance, it can really mean a lot, especially if you are like a content creator or whatever, or you have a large platform, because, there are lots of people who you kind of end up guessing. I mean, it can make you a bit like twitchy. I mean, maybe it's if you spend too much time in politics and stuff, and I recommend trying to train yourself out of this. But, as soon as someone says something a bit dubious, you're like, oh, God, some other celebrity's going to say something bullshit about trans people. Like, there's almost one a day.
Yeah.
And just saying, like, by the way, I'm not a dickhead, like, that it can really mean a lot to people, especially if you're creating some art that they love. Like, it's great.
There's also the option of just going straight for the jugular, so to speak. I found this one tweet that just it laid me out. I was done. This one tweet by Soulmate that says, J.K. Rowling's going through some stuff, so she put me in charge of making dumb changes to the Harry Potter universe. Effective immediately. Dementors are Latina. Hermione's now Hermione. Hagrid has fibromyalgia. Wands are called bang noodles, and Hogwarts has a billiards table. And it got so much attention that J.K. Rowling actually allegedly responded and demanded that this person take it down. She says, delete that post immediately. It's a lie, and I did no such thing. And then he says, sorry, I'm J.K. She says, thank you. And then they go, no, I mean, I'm you now. Why are you so mad about my books, TERF? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And he ends up putting up this screen cap of the Harry Potter font, but it's Giuseppe Stromboli and the briefcase of meatballs. And it's cut off on the tweet that we see here. You can see the bottom of it right now. And she just loses it. Unfortunately, it's cut off, but she was not happy about that situation.
I assumed that was fake, but I hope it's real.
I'm not sure one way or the other. It could have been a very convincing fake out, but oh my goodness. Either way, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. So yeah, sometimes just laughing at it, because a lot of the not to make light of it and not to say that there isn't real work that needs to be done, serious work, but it feels like a lot of this comes at you with the intention of knocking you off your balance, right? And to be like, I'm going to throw something else out there that's going to wreck you, and then I'm going to win the argument because you will have been tripped up. And if we can instead be like, ha, I'm going to laugh at this, I'm going to turn this into something funny that guts you instead. That by itself is a great way to kind of turn the tables a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's sometimes a bit of a preconception that, again, from the reactionary crew, that you can't tell jokes about trans people. And it's just such nonsense. There's so much room to tell jokes about this whole thing. Like if you follow a handful of trans people on Twitter or something, that's all we do. So there's so much room for it, and it's it's a good situation. Sometimes it's good to make fun of shit situations, and that's keeps people going, keeps morale high. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then just as a final question, Katy, as a trans ally, as a trans woman, as somebody who experiences this on this in a deep level, how can the average trans ally fight back against this kind of damage? Somebody who doesn't have a large platform or a show or a lot of money to donate to charities or a lot of time to do this extra research and write Medium pieces, or however we are privileged in a way to be able to fight back in a larger way. How does the average person kind of do that and make a difference?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this recently. It's difficult. There's a few things. I guess if you know it, the first thing I'd say is if you know any trans people, I guess I would say particularly in the UK, because it's been a stressful few weeks in the UK for trans people. Just reach out to them and say that you're there for them or something, because that really can make a big difference. I mean, I'm very lucky to have a lot of very good friends who are there for me, but in the last few weeks with the sort of string of nonsense that's happened, it's been quite isolating. So that that can make a big difference. Especially some trans people are very unlucky and don't have large support networks because of prejudice, and transition's very difficult, and some people aren't the kind of person who goes out and talks to people when they're facing a problem. So even if maybe you think they're ignoring you, just sending a nice message might make a big difference. And another thing that I'd recommend is, if you can and you have the time, some way talk to your politician. I think in the UK we had this thing where there was this rumor in the newspaper that the government was going to announce some rollback of trans rights, and thousands of people all of a sudden about this one issue, which the government probably didn't even think about because we've got loads of things going on in the UK,
Yeah.
They got thousands and thousands of emails and handwritten letters and phone calls, and it makes a huge difference. Like politicians, you know, they know about the big issues like Brexit, but most of them probably don't even, they do not give a shit about trans people. And if all of a sudden they've got a load of people like yelling down their phone saying like, mate, what the hell are you doing? Like, why are you going to take trans rights away? They'd be like, whoa, okay, people care about this. I at least need to do some research. And I think that can make a big difference.
Certainly.
Yeah, and then I think like learning and supporting like trans content creators and stuff can be great. Like follow me on Twitter. That'll solve all the problems. No, you don't have to follow me, but like I think that you know, so much of what people know about trans people, they learn from cis people. I mean, I would say that's one of the main reasons the gender critical movement exists. Like you meet all these people and they're like, trans people think this. And you're like, what? Like, where have you got this from? Like one of the first like major ones of those I saw, they were like, well, if trans women are women, then how come trans lesbians don't date each other? I was like, what? Like half of the trans lesbians I know are dating lesbians. Like it's a meme. Like that just trans people just date each other. That's like a thing. And I couldn't believe it. And then suddenly like some celebrity tweets that or something, and they get like 14,000 likes or something. And I'm like, what? Like, and it's because they've never talked to a trans person. They get all their information from these like nonsense memes. Even just following a trans person, like even if you were skeptical about all of this, like follow a trans person, and within a week you would have learned that trans people date each other because
yes.
And they talk about it too much, and I'm sick of it. No, it's but like just learning can be great, and also like watching stuff with trans people in can be good. Like representation is quite important, I think. But yeah, I was like just earlier I was watching some YouTube stuff and got an advert of like a famous trans person here in the UK, Paris Lees, who's great. Shout out to Paris. Just like on an advert, and that like mentioned she's a trans woman in it and sort of discussed it. I just thought, God, like when I was a kid, if there was like some cool, like pretty, like smashing it trans woman just being chill on TV, that would have changed. It changes your whole perception. So I think
as opposed to being like the villain in a murder movie or the punchline in a joke.
Yeah, usually both at the same time. Yeah. Yeah, so all those things can help, I think.
I like that we ended on that kind of a more positive note. Thank you for that. We are despite all of this nonsense and this vitriol, we are in a better place, and the trajectory is still good, and that's what is scaring these people. That's what is
it's a reaction.
Galvanizing these movements is the concept that, oh no, we are losing control. The world is changing and we don't like it. But the world is changing and we're not going anywhere.
Yeah, definitely. Pandora's box has been opened.
Yes.
Fuck you.
I like it. I want that on a shirt. Pandora's box has been opened. Fuck you. Katie, how can people find you? If we want to start supporting trans content creators, let's start with Katie. Where can people go to find you?
You can search Katy Montgomerie, which is KatyMontgomerie. So the IE and the Y are the wrong way around. What are you thinking? And I'm on like Twitter's my main thing because that's the thing I'm most addicted to. I'm just kind of starting up my YouTube channel. I've written some things on Medium if you want to like a comprehensive takedown of gender critical positions with sources. And if you like pictures of cats, then come to my Instagram. Yeah,
nice. that's how to snare the secular sexuality crowd. Is like their cat pictures, you guys.
It's really about all it takes.
We've got you. All right. Do we want to say hi to our crew cam real quick and thank everybody for being here on the show today? Speaking of cats, speaking of kittens, little babies.
Thanks, crew.
All right. And then if you want to support us, if you want more secular sexuality in your diet, we are here on YouTube every Thursday at 7 p.m. Central. You can also email us at sex@atheist-community.org. You can support us on Patreon. You can call our hotline if talking on the phone live is not your thing, but you'd like to call in. That's 512-666-0ASK. 512-666-0275 is that number. And we also have a Twitter account. So follow @Secular Sex for links to upcoming episodes and tweets shared from previous guests.
Yeah, and I'll just remind everybody that all of that information will be in the show notes to this episode. So if you don't have your pens handy, we've got links to Katy as well as to our Teespring and the ACA Discord server, which we're going to be jumping into briefly after this if you're catching us live. That, if you're following along, is tiny.cc/ACA Discord. And all of those links are collected on whatever platform you happen to be hearing my voice through.
Perfect. You want to take us out, Christy?
Yeah, fair enough. I guess this is a great moment for all people to come together in allyship, whether you're trans or a trans ally, and not anybody outside of that. To give themselves a big old orgasm, or better yet, give somebody else one.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?